Are we good to go? Are you recording, Jess?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, thank you. So hi everyone, a very warm welcome to the final event in our series. It has been an absolute blast. We've had some great feedback and collected some great stories and insights along the way. I'd like to just take this opportunity to thank our speakers, all 36 or 37 of them. They've put in time and effort to delivering great content, and they've really made this series what it is. So all of the recordings from the series, if you've missed them, don't worry, they're available online, and we've started collating some of the content and reflections in some blogs and articles, and we'll be following up with some more of those. We've got lots of ideas about how we want to take things forward, but we're really keen to get your input and hear what you've enjoyed most. If you've got specific ideas about what else we could be doing to support this community, please do get in touch. Let us know what you're thinking. So as well as thanking the speakers, I'd like to thank our events team, Anita in particular, who hasn't made it today. She's got other events on. She's looked after all the background details and really done a fab job, as well as the rest of the KTN team. So people that have helped with co-hosting and sharing their expertise through presentations. I'd also like to thank Product Design Scotland, who have partnered with us right through this series, and Ali McInroy in particular, who's co-chaired every event to date, but unfortunately can't make it along today. And finally, just thank you to you guys for being such a great audience, for submitting great questions, being so enthusiastic, and yeah, generally just engaging really well. So in Ali's absence, today's session is going to be co-hosted by Jake from our design team. And we're going to be looking at design thinking and systems thinking. So this really ties together the messaging from all the events today. And as a systems engineer myself, I'm really passionate about this subject matter and happy to chat in exhaustive detail if anybody wants to pick it up offline. So before I rattle on too much or get caught up in the details, I'm going to hand you over to Jake, who's going to look after you all in today's session. So Jake, over to you.
Thank you, Abby, and hello all. It's really great to have you here. So as Abby says, I'm Jake. I'm part of the design team at KTN. What we try to do is we try to embed human-centered design and human-centered design principles into companies' R&D processes, particularly those that haven't considered doing it in the past. I'm very pleased to be hosting this session, the very last session in this popular series. So a big thank you to everyone that's here today. I can see there's 49 of us currently. And thank you for those that have been tuning in throughout this whole series. Today's subject is on design thinking and systems principles. And we've got some great speakers that I'll introduce soon, who are leading thinkers and practitioners in these subjects. At the end of this session, we'll take a look at some other funding opportunities that are available, so do stick around. I'm going to introduce these speakers in a bit more detail as they come up to the virtual podium. But they are, if you go on to the next slide, please, Abby, they are Tristan Allen from Room 44. His presentation is called The Function of Innovation. We also have Neil Stone from Leapstone Limited. His presentation is called Beyond Products, 4 Thoughts. And then we also have Martin Aston from Airbus. His presentation is about transforming engineering. As we go through, you can start to post your questions in the Q&A box, which is on the bottom of your screen. Any technical issues, please put that in the chat box instead. And I'd challenge you to try and give us some really tasty, difficult questions if you could, and challenge our speakers, please. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly introduce you to Meeting Mojo. Obviously, we can't see other delegates at the moment, but we'd encourage you to put a short profile on Meeting Mojo, and that way you'll be able to have visibility to connect with one another, which is what this is all about after all. And yeah, we want to try and grow this community. If you're here, then I presume that you may be a bit familiar with design thinking or systems principles, or maybe you've heard of the subjects at the very least. They're both subjects that are close to KTN, particularly the design team. And we'd be very grateful if you could join in with this conversation and our speakers. KTN tries to help develop robust propositions. We try to make connections, and we try to help innovators go from idea to manufactured products. So if you are interested in anything that's spoken about today, please do get in contact with us, and we'll try and introduce you to relevant experts in these subject areas. So that's enough from me, I think. So first up, I'd like to welcome Tristan Allen. If you'd like to unmute yourself, please. Tristan is partner at Room 44, situated right next to the Silverstone racetrack in Northamptonshire. Room 44 is about future thinking and future proofing. They create sustainable strategic visions that are actionable in short, medium, and long terms in consumer health, consumer packaging goods, and mobility. The one take-home message that I'd like you to take home from Tristan's presentation is what you are developing for hasn't happened yet. Over to you, Tristan.
Thanks, Jake. Hope you can hear me, everybody. It's nice to be here. As it says on the screen, Room 44 Innovates. We're a strategic agency based near Milton Keynes at Silverstone. And we very strongly adopted the methodology of design thinking, later called human-centered design, in helping our clients develop a strategy that takes them into the future and begin to anticipate what's going to happen, rather than relying on data which tells them what has happened. Obviously you can forecast with data, but you can't always trust it to be as illuminating as you need to if you're going to develop consumer propositions and user propositions, and that's how we tend to be asked to help people. I've got to ask Abigail to switch my slide, which is working seamlessly. Perfect, thank you. So the function of innovation, and this may be teaching Granny to suck eggs a little bit, but I want to go back because I think it might set up the other speakers later on as well. The function of innovation, as we see it anyway, is to take insight and develop it into future opportunities and new product options. And the reason we do that is so that consumers can benefit from the solution that we anticipate that they're going to want in time. That isn't to say that innovation is always about the future, and we'll come back to that point in a second. Just ping it forward, please, Abby. So in most companies, R&D, innovation, open innovation, whatever you want to call it, marketing even, in those departments, you'll have a mix of disciplines working together to try and come up with great new ideas that will future-proof a business. And typically in business, we tend to know what our product does for people today. We spend less time considering what that might do for them in the future. And in knowing what a customer benefits from by buying our thing, we also know what the market value is today. But of course, we have to try and assess what that market will value in the future. They aren't necessarily the same thing. And in a couple of slides' time, we'll talk about an example of that. But in drawing together these two polar opposites, really, what we know and what we know we don't know, we are able to make some strategic decisions and hopefully be the first to see new futures, which puts us into a competitively advantageous position. So seeing a different opportunity than competitors and being ready for new disruptive competition when it enters the market is what an established business really has to do proactively. Within the design thinking mix, it's typically thought that if you spend 70% of your time doing what you do, because that's where your business is, that's a good use of your time. If you can put 20% of your time into the next thing, that's a good thing to do as well. And then 10%, which amounts to about half a day a week, typically, into this future position, that's also very valuable. And you can look at this slide in any way you choose. This is what we call an innovation portfolio when it's fully populated. It can be a cone, it can be a grid like this. But what we're talking about here is having three horizons in business. Typically, again, we will position the client that we're talking to in the bottom left-hand corner. And most of what clients would describe to us as the next thing they're going to do would sit in the incremental product, the H1 box, or in the adjacent growth box. And that's because the second position, the second horizon, tends to be populated with things the company wants to do, but hasn't got the capital to do yet, or looks a bit too hard to do straight away, and they get pushed out. But very often, there's not a huge amount of going on, in the Horizon 3 area. And that's where we try and operate. We try and do what Steve Jobs is famously reported to have said, which is to step into the future and look back. And I liken this to one of those little cartoon mazes you used to get in comics when we were all kids. If you try and do a maze from the outside in, it always goes wrong. If you do it from the inside out, it always goes right, because you can see exactly where you need to go to get there. Abby, could you just flick it forward, please? So in assessing what's going to happen, we have to be mindful of the fact that things are happening around us that we don't know about, or don't know as much about as maybe we could. And this is illustrated by a graphic that I use sometimes, by a board table with everybody looking into the middle, or your directors looking at each other, discussing what the company has to go through, and everything else in the world is going on behind them. So by throwing some provocateurs into a conversation, like in the mobility market, we know, for example, that the internal combustion engine, the ICE, is going to be something of the past in the not too distant future, and the fuel of choice that's being presented to us at the moment is electricity. Now, hydrogen may feature in that mix. It's not there yet, but it probably will be for haulage. But by knowing that electricity is going to represent the fuel for all new cars in a time frame, we can do something about our business if we're involved in mobility today. The mobility market and the EV market, electric vehicle market, it's been said to us that this is going to be put in place so that all new cars have to be fully electric by, and then pick your date. It's been 2045, it's been 2042, it's been 2032, and it's currently at 2032. And if you listen to some people, countries are starting to impose rules on commercial vehicles. All new vans may have to be electric in some places by 2022. May not happen, but it does give some credence to the idea that most things that we imagine to happen within about 5 years at the moment land up in our market within 18 months. That's typically how fast things are moving. Just running forward, in the medical market, we know that doctors are limited by their knowledge, their personal training, and machines are very good at diagnosing things better than doctors do in some cases, in lots of cases. The Watson supercomputer has been doing this for years, gathering symptomatic data so it can do that. We're told as well that because of the way that we're being educated, medicine is being pushed into a preventative state rather than waiting for something to go wrong. We'll try and take care of ourselves. Food is going from meat and 2 veg in the UK to a plant-based environment, and on it goes. So by taking account of these mega trends that are going on around us, every company will find something in there to flag a change. And I say every company quite seriously, because even if you are, if you're an accountant, for example, you probably have stopped doing a lot of the bookkeeping stuff you used to do 5 years ago. That's gone to FreshBooks or FreeBooks or Free Agent. So this chart gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. I've split this into 10, but it could be any number you choose. And the 10 in this case means 10 years. So if you are at the bottom left-hand corner and you sit in a market which we assume to be in decline to some extent, the bottom triangle on that rectangle connotes that a market is in decline, and that's where you sit today. I'm going to use the example of the electric vehicle market again. Quite recently, we sat in a room where an exhaust pipe manufacturer suddenly realised quite publicly that his business wasn't looking quite so great in a market that only consumes electric vehicles. And we would say, well, go figure. But that dawning light of realisation for that individual gave him the opportunity to evolve his market into a different condition. If you could flick it forward, Abby, please. Same chart, differently expressed. So what he will now, and it was a he, that's why I'm saying he, what that person is now going to do is, over the course of a period of time, is move his business away from making exhaust pipes and bending pipes to doing something else. Strategically, he could be looking at a market which he does something else that uses bent pipes in, or that uses cat converters in, or he will reposition his market so that he's not making exhaust pipes for Formula One cars or for the traditional mass production market. He's going to go into heritage, where there will be a market for people like him. So having the opportunity, by looking outside your business to see where consumers are going to be, is very, very important in underwriting and future-proofing what you do today. It may mean, of course, moving away from moving to a completely different production facility or method. It may mean just pivoting into something else with the kit and people that you've already got. Abby, could you ping it forward, please? Just doing a bit of a time check here. Right. So in doing that, what we're going to try and do is position ourselves into a notional future place, and then pick some baby steps along the way that we're going to put in place to take us towards the end game. And of course, if you're looking 10 years out, the end game is going to change because new trends will evolve and develop. So, sorry, I've just got the pinger, so I'm going to be very quick now. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have what market research typically tells us about markets. It tells us what the viewable trend is. It tells us what current markets are out there. It knows what consumer behavior is, and it tells us what our competitors are doing. But by taking a more holistic view of markets, and if you could just flick it one more time, Abby, please, you then get the introduction of these external mega macro trends. So we can see that, for example, legislation is telling us that cars are going to be electric. We can see emerging technology. So LiDAR is out there and cars are going to become autonomous to some extent. Tesla's doing that now. We can see that consumers are going into those markets actively or not. At the moment, the EV market is 2 new cars in 10. It's going to be 10 in 10 in 10 years' time. And we can see, if we look carefully enough, from patents and from other places, what our competitors might do. And all of this stuff goes to making the opportunity for us much more alive, and the strategic possibility for us is that we can see a different future than our competitors. Right, last slide. So this is, there's a download here which you can get from the chat, which is just a little guide into seeing it differently and doing the hardest thing, which is how to sell this innovation back into your own company, into a mindset that typically is based on fiscal planning. So thanks very much indeed.
Great, thank you so much, Tristan. That was really interesting. I saw a couple of hands up in the attendees list, and there's a question in the chat function. I'd encourage everybody to put your questions into the Q&A box. You can find that at the bottom of your screens. Please do pop that in the Q&A box, and we'll come to a Q&A session with the whole panel at the end of this. So please pop it in there too. Next up is Neil Stone from Leapstone Limited. I'd invite Neil to unmute yourself and share your screen, please. Whilst you're doing that, Neil Stone is founder and director of Leapstone Limited, based in London. He's a senior tutor at the Royal College of Art on the Service Design Masters course, and is appointed as a design associate on the UK Design Council's Designing Demand programme, where he's mentoring small and medium enterprises to better understand how design can strategically improve their business. He's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce. Leapstone Limited specialises in how organisations can use design and creativity to best effect. The one take-home message that I'd like you to take home from Neil's presentation is: ask the right questions. Looking to fix symptoms doesn't fix the root cause. Over to you, Neil.
Brilliant, thank you, Jake. Can you hear me okay? Hopefully, brilliant. So I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes and share 4 thoughts, hopefully just to get you to think perhaps a little bit beyond the traditional domain of product. Before I do that, just a very quick word about Leapstone. I founded the business just over 10 years ago now. And in essence, it's very difficult to describe what one does in such a kind of complex domain, but in essence, it's creative problem solving. And I do that with organizations across all the kind of major sectors, whether that's the commercial sector, the public sector, or the charity sector. I suppose in essence what any process tends to follow is these 4 steps in some way, shape or form. Firstly, there's a kind of bringing people together and actually pulling people from across an organization or partner organizations together. asking good questions. What is the challenge that we are trying to unpick, and what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Coming together to co-create answers, actually, with working with client teams to help them discover the answer themselves, sometimes bringing in external expertise where that's necessary. And last but not least, generating some kind of results out of the back of the work. I've always been a fan of baking into the essence of the design brief. You know, what's the kind of key thing that we're trying to shift here, and then constantly going back and evaluating that as we go through the project, even post-launch, actually going back and iterating and developing things further, if that seems necessary. Idea one that I want to land on you today is that design is kind of quite a poorly understood thing, I think. I think that design, if you ask most people on the street, they would say, well, it's about coming up with neat ideas, coming up with solutions, brainstorming, sketching, making prototypes, etc. Perhaps they would say some of those things. And I suppose that the big thing that I want to explore first of all is that actually exploring solutions is only part of the real process here. There was work published by the UK Design Council about 15 years ago now. They introduced this visual of what good design process looked like. They called it the double diamond. And they introduced the idea that really good design process, where there was some kind of breakthrough element, where some great innovative step had taken place, actually explored the problem really well, first of all, before diving into solutions. And actually, a lot of what Tristan said chimed, because actually, by looking more broadly beyond the domain of the business or the actual kind of the product solution that we might have, let's go and really understand the problem that our customers have. It's a very important way of avoiding the pitfall of having a solution, a product, a technology solution that's beautifully engineered or brilliantly marketed, but actually is meeting a need that nobody has, and is going to end up on the scrap heap quite quickly. So by looking at the problem, we're avoiding looking at knee-jerk solutions, and it avoids this problem that I see a lot in organizations, where they've run straight into quick, what's the answer? And they're kind of coming up with good answers to bad questions. The second thing that I want to talk about is this idea that often in projects, when it's led by a particular specialism, the project nature and the focus and the kind of the hue of the project will take on the hue of that specialism. So if marketing is leading a project, then it will be a very marketing type project, and it might kind of focus in on marketing, perhaps to the exclusion of some other expertise that needs to be roped in. I don't think design is like that. I think design is pretty awesome actually at integrating the needs of lots of different diverse stakeholders. So on this chart here, I've kind of held back from labeling who these stakeholders might be, but we might have people from operations, from marketing, from production, from sales, from finance, and beyond, going into the world of the user, who's going to actually distribute and sell our product, who's going to service it, and so forth. And design thinking, I think, is a kind of middle of the room discipline, where it's actually seeking to align the needs of all these different stakeholders from around around the orbit of our product. It's trying to find out what motivates them, and it's trying to find a solution that sits in the middle. That's very different to design by committee, which might end up with quite a bland outcome. The design, when used in this way, can still have attitude, you can still have a point of view, but it's integrated the views of many people around the system. The third thing that I want to briefly touch in on is this, that you're probably, given the title of the series, if you're developing a product and you're thinking about how to take that product onto manufacture and into sales, then it's quite likely that you're thinking about the physicality of that product, and you're probably thinking about the use case of that product during its use. So if you kind of think about a vacuum cleaner, for example, we might think about it sort of living under the stairs and coming out every now and again for use, and we're sort of designing around that sort of central gravity. I think one other thing that's important to think about is that no product exists just during its use. There'll be some warm-up. So even if we look at the physical swim lane here on this journey chart, there'll be a before component. So people have to learn about your product. People have to become aware of it. They will probably go through some decision making to buy it. There'll be some question about packaging somewhere and shipping. And lastly, looking at after, what does happen after use? Is there any kind of need for support or technical advice? Can I buy components so that we can make sure that the thing doesn't end up in the recycling centre sooner rather than later? So thinking about time running from left to right across this chart, we can unpack the before and the after components of what this experience might look like. But as soon as we start to do that, I dare say that we might even think about the digital and the human domains. So actually, what might be the role of web and what might be the role of people in the mix here, both before, during and after our product is being used. So thinking about expanding our thinking over time. And last but not least, quite a bunch of stuff on this chart. So I'm going to talk you through it in the simpler way as possible. But I do think it's important to think about other ways that you might be able to capture value from your product. This is from a piece by Pine and Gilmore, two Harvard academics who wrote The Experience Economy a few years back. And in it, they put forward the idea that in any sector, you can actually sort the kinds of things that are going on in that sector into these five kind of domains. When they wrote the paper, they related it to coffee. So I'm going to use coffee as the example just now, but for coffee, read your own product or service idea. So they said that you can obviously operate in the commodity realm of coffee, which is in the kind of coffee bean category. You'll be led by market pricing, and your ability to differentiate in the market is quite limited because you are literally shipping a commodity. You can make the commodity more useful and turn it into a product. You could roast the coffee, you could package it, you could use brand and styling to position your product in the market, and you can move a little bit along the premium pricing spectrum. You can price your product a bit more highly than you could were you just a commodity. Third up, you could make the coffee beans more helpful by brewing and pouring them and turning them into a service. So if you think about your local cafe or whether it's a roadside diner, someone is turning the coffee beans into something that's infinitely more usable, and I can put in a cup and enjoy it straight away. And for that, I can charge more per cup, and I can differentiate. My scope to differentiate in the market is ever greater. But it doesn't stop there, because a small startup in Seattle a few years ago spotted that you can take the coffee out of service and on and into experience. So if you think about Starbucks, we think about other big coffee chains, they've sort of taken the essence of a cup of coffee and turned it into an experience that has us coming back for more. The pricing is become more premium, and the ability to differentiate in the market is even greater. And last but not least, we have transformation, where there's some kind of educational component to what's going on. So for a transformation, you can charge even more, and you can differentiate greatly in the market. So this is a sort of the realm of learning how to roast your own coffee, or going on a barista course, and so on and so forth. So just think, if you are developing a product and you're thinking about taking it to market, maybe just think about either side on this value curve. Are there ways that we could begin to think about our artifacts, part of a product service system? Could we build more of an experience from it, and so forth? So they're the key things that I wanted to say. I think contact details are probably going into the chat, but if you'd like to ask any questions, please do. And if you want to get in touch, please do that as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Neil. That's really excellent. And yeah, again, any questions for Neil, please put in the Q&A box or raise your hands at the end, and we will try and come to you and answer those questions. Next up, we have Martin Aston. I would welcome you to unmute yourself and begin to share your screen, please, Martin. Whilst you do so, Martin is a senior manager at Airbus, part of the Brunel Challenge. Martin heads up the Brunel Challenge, which is a project that takes a fresh look at how we think about product development. Although he has spent many years at Airbus working on physically large, complex systems projects, much of the thinking translates to developing hardware products in startups. So in Martin's presentation, I would like you to focus on the message of re-engineering engineering and how systems thinking is reliant on a controlled system. You can't just do what you want. Over to you, Martin.
Super job, thank you. Yes, so although I actually work for Airbus, as we just said in the introduction, I'm spending a lot of my time at the moment leading an initiative called the Brunel Challenge, as it says there. We're all about transforming engineering, transformational change within engineering, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll understand why we actually need to do that if we're to deliver the products that are needed to meet society's needs. What I would say is you can see along the bottom the various industrial sectors that are currently involved in Brunel Challenge. That's not an exhaustive list, and I wouldn't be frightened off by that, although we're looking at automotive, defense, aerospace and such like. This applies to everybody who designs and develops any product. The same challenges face everybody, and hopefully we can work together to actually transform that process and make it beneficial to everybody. Bear with me. I'm trying to work out why this isn't working. Okay, so looking at the sort of problem we're facing, if you like, is that society suddenly finds a whole load of different challenges. And what we are saying is it's engineering that is actually going to provide the solutions to those challenges. Some people say design, some people say engineering. What are those challenges? But before we get to that point, what is actually engineering? It was quite interesting earlier about what is design. It's quite remarkable how misunderstood design and misunderstood engineering are. Fundamentally, what engineering is, it's the conversion of knowledge to useful things. So engineering is what takes science. It applies a process of both analysis and creativity. And what comes out of that is a portfolio of transformative or useful products and a portfolio of services. It's very important, if you look in the picture in the middle there, that this is not a purely analytical process. You require that combination of creativity and analysis. We need to make sure that the product meets its objectives, but also we have to come up with fresh ideas. And the previous two presentations have shown the importance of both analysis and creativity in delivering a product that the market actually wants, the market actually needs. Wrong way. So this is a snapshot to try and explain what the challenges we face are in the 21st century. It's quite interesting. I think there's almost two versions of this slide, one of which is a half-empty view, which looks at them as challenges. There's another version that you can look at the same slide and look at it as opportunities. And I think one of the things we've got to do is stop looking at things as problems and start looking at every challenge as an opportunity, particularly in these complex times. So within the Brunel Challenge, we've identified and clustered challenges around three areas, one of which is societal. Clearly, this is changing at an alarming rate at the moment. In fact, we almost have to change this slide daily at the moment. The whole global economic system is fundamentally different to what it was just a few weeks ago, but the threat to climate, the threat to the environment hasn't gone away, and that's going to require solutions to actually address the climate change problem. It's quite misunderstood, I think, in terms of what the issue there is. The planet will fix itself. We don't have to worry about the planet. What we have to worry about is the human race within that planet. But similarly, we face issues such as evolving career ambitions. If we look at engineering, if we look at traditional approach to engineering, it's typically based on experience. You find people who gathered experience over a long period of time. What happens when we start to employ the Generation Z community, where they only stay in the job for probably 5-10 years max? So how do we manage corporate knowledge when our workforce is very transitory and we're trying to deliver ever increasing complexity in terms of our products? Technical issues are huge. If we want to deliver products that are fundamentally better than the previous generation in terms of product performance, and in particular in terms of environmental performance, it's not easy to do. And what we've got to do is look at fundamental different products, but also how we integrate technologies into those products. And because of the pressures that are upon us in terms of business pressures and also time pressures, we've got to get those right first time. We can't go back to how it was done in the 1950s, where we had large national research programs where lots of people were involved in very complex demonstrator programs. We've got to come up with technologies now. We've got to get them into the market and get them into the market quickly. But also, we've got challenges in terms of demonstrating that those products do what they should do and are also safe. And in the Brunel Challenge presentations, we deliberately show that picture at the bottom right, which is a car without a steering wheel. Regulatory compliance is getting harder and harder. And in order to actually meet the regulations that are defining the safety of cars of that type, using traditional assurance processes, you would have to drive that car 11 billion miles and it would take 500 years. So clearly something has to change in engineering and product assurance process. And finally, the commercial and political challenges that we face. What's quite interesting is what we regard as sector boundaries at the moment. The opening slide to the presentation showed those different sectors. The picture on the bottom right there is an Airbus flying car. I would challenge anybody to say if that is a car, is it a plane, or if you listen to Uber, they say it's neither, it's a transportation system. So clearly the world is in a state of flux, and I think the people who are going to do best are the ones that are actually able to embrace that, but embrace it quickly and securely. So systems engineering, here's an example. Everybody's talking about net zero. Achieving net zero is a very complex systems engineering challenge, and hopefully I can explain why. So we talked about hydrogen earlier in one of the previous presentations. So everybody says, right, if we're going to protect the planet, let's come up with a hydrogen-powered aeroplane. That is an actual picture of a hydrogen-powered aeroplane. It might not look like that, but that's someone's view of the future. So obviously, if we come up with a hydrogen-powered aeroplane, the exhaust is just water, so that must be great for the planet, mustn't it? Well, maybe not. Because if we're going to develop a hydrogen-powered aircraft, then we have to generate a lot of power to produce the hydrogen. We then have to distribute that power. If the aircraft has got batteries on it as well, that power has somehow got to get to the airport, because not many airports are next to power stations. We have to get the hydrogen to the airport to refuel the aircraft. Then there's all the surface transport getting to and from the airport, but also actually on the airport itself. That's even before we think about how you would actually go about making that. So we've got to look at the raw materials, the rare earth materials that are needed to develop the batteries and some of the complex materials to give us a lightweight aircraft. Then we've got to think about actually disposing of that aircraft at the end of its life as well. So suddenly, what seemed like a good idea, we will have a hydrogen-powered aircraft to fix the environmental challenge we face. Suddenly, that aircraft has to fit into a massive system of systems problem. So it could be that actually that aircraft is worse for the environment than an alternative solution. And this is the sort of analysis, this is the sort of thinking that is going to take priority going forward as requirements become ever more constraining and become stricter in terms of actual achieving environmental conditions. So here's some thoughts about how you go about developing a product within a very complex system such as that. One of the key factors that's going to come out of this is that it's going to be increasingly collaborative. You will not be able to operate in isolation. It's also going to push the absolute limits of what you know. So a lot of those aircraft, we don't have the experience of that. We don't have the experience of autonomous cars. We don't have the experience of fusion reactors in nuclear power. So what's going to give business competitiveness is the ability to actually look at all those different challenges, look at all those different opportunities, look at the solutions, but actually integrate them into an actual system of systems. It is going to be more competitive, and the regulation is going to get tighter and tighter. So we have to be ready for that. So there's some points to consider when doing that. One of which is actually understanding the requirements. This was actually the previous presentation, but actually what are the real requirements? So if we looked at the previous slide, you'd think that the requirement was a zero-emission aircraft. No, it's not. It's what you're trying to do is look at that system of systems challenge and actually understand the real problem. You've got to be able to manage those interfaces. Again, you won't be operating in isolation. You need to understand how we actually design the product in real time, but also in a more collaborative way. Oh, how do I stop that? So, oh, excuse me. So, oh, hang on, I'm just trying to use the IT, which is a bit complicated. The assurances and verification processes are going to be far more complex. We will do less reliance on physical testing and increasingly rely on statistical and mathematical analysis, the so-called V diagram. We will not be doing lots and lots of testing of prototypes. We have to be ready to look at different ways to actually demonstrate that the product actually performs the way it did and was safe. So apologies, it's a bit rushed, but bottom line is that we have to adopt a completely new way of product development, a new way of engineering, and new engineers within it. And it says there at the bottom, we're going to have to re-engineer engineering if we're going to achieve those requirements in terms of net zero and other societal challenges that we face. So hopefully, Abby, that worked.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Martin. We've now got 15 minutes left on this session, so I'm going to open up for Q&A for at least 10 minutes of those. We've got a couple of questions that are in the Q&A box from your presentation, so thank you very much, guys. If you've got any more questions, do put them in there whilst I'm chatting. First one that's up the top of my list comes from Gareth Jones. It says, Tristan, thank you for your talk. When pivoting in response to market trends, any advice on how to choose between changing the product that you offer versus changing the customers that you are selling to?
That's a great question. I think, well, both things can be right. And it depends on the length of your forward view, Gareth. When we talk about innovation, we typically imagine it's going to be massively disruptive. Whatever we create next is going to change the world for somebody. And actually, the scenario that I described at the start of this set of presentations was the exhaust pipe manufacturer who probably would morph into selling the same pipes to a different group, a different niche. So it's really down to the individual case. It's very meretricious. I think there's an argument to say that you would do both things over time. You would redirect your marketing, your positioning to a new niche while you're trying to build out that longer term strategic position. So there's no right or wrong answer to this. It depends very much on the situation that you're in. Or get some great advice from someone like the three of us, of course.
Great one, thank you. We've got another question here from Monica. This one is directed to Neil, possibly. Is it feasible to have a product or service in more than one of the 5 categories that you've shown on your graph, from commodity to transformation, e.g. sell a product for some and target for transformation for other clients?
Yeah, thanks Jake, and thanks Monica for the question. I was trying to type the answer and it was getting too lengthy, so I thought it was better to maybe just verbalize it. So I think when Pine and Gilmore first published their paper, they called that chart the progression of economic value, which basically gives a sense of, it was trying to get people to think how they might move their product actually along that value curve. So if you have a commodity, how might you begin to turn what you do into a product? And if you have a product, how could you turn that into a service, and so forth? I think, at least in theory, it's not impossible to have one provider that's offering different levels of value. As you said in your question, so sell the product for some and target transformation for other clients. But the intention behind their paper was always to try and get people to think about how might they develop their thinking so that they could create and capture further value. Hopefully that's answered the question.
Great, thank you. Question for Martin now. This one comes from Rory. Do you think model-based or virtual validation or assurance is scalable across high and low volume and high and low value products, or more befitting of high integrity, high value scenarios?
Okay, interesting one. I think the answer to that is it's got to apply to all products. Increasingly, the assurance process is getting very expensive, even for what we would regard as high volume, low cost products, but also they have to operate increasingly within this systems of systems activity. So if we're going to get the cost of products down, the timescales of product introduction down, we have to find ways of doing that. We cannot just rely on very expensive, very time consuming physical testing. So the simple answer is yes, it has to be applicable to both, and we've got to find ways of doing it.
Great, thank you. This is a question from me, I guess, to all of you. Maybe just a couple of words on your thoughts on this. Collaboration has come up a few times in your presentations. I'd like to know what is the role of vision when you are avoiding design by committee or encouraging collaborative design? Just a few words on that. Perhaps first.
Do you want to go on that one, Tristan?
Yeah, sure. I think it's very, very easy in an innovation setting context for the data to torpedo good conjecture. In the context within which change can occur has to be created, has to be right. It's no good just dropping an innovation ideation session in on a board meeting and expect them to get their heads around it when the last thing they were looking at was a set of financial reports and forecasts for the next quarter. You've got to build the environment for people to think a bit more holistically and outside the box that they sit within. And in doing that, there are tools that all three of us use, I'm sure, to get collaboration and to maybe even use some directed thinking methodology to bring in left field stimulus, for example. It's very hard in a team of people who have worked together in certain ways for a long time to get them to think differently. That's a major challenge to innovation. And if you're the innovation manager, good luck with that, because the CEO will always have that right of veto, unless it's a nailed on gold-plated argument that he just cannot win.
Great, thank you, Neil.
Yeah, I think my sort of one-word answer is alignment to your question, Jake. What's the role of vision in collaboration? Because actually, one of the big problems that I come across, it doesn't matter what the nature of the organization is, whether it's small or big or commercial or a charity, is actually getting alignment and consensus on what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and therefore how that directs the potential kind of solution set to solve that problem. One really fun way of actually doing that is I run an exercise, it goes by various guises, but I call it future memories, which is where I work with a team to basically create a future memory. It might be a newspaper headline or, kind of a front page of a web news article that is describing the successes of their project, but 10 years out. And it's a terrific way of galvanizing, excitement around where we might be going. But because it's 10 years old, because it's 10 years out, it also drops everyone's shoulders in terms of, well, we'll never be able to deliver that, or there's this reason over here that's going to hinder us. And it actually really helps create alignment and galvanizes energy within a team.
Great, thank you. Martin?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the classic phrase is a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I think an image on a screen is probably worth 1,000 data sets. If you look in aircraft, there's a huge amount of work goes into cockpit design, and it's to try and get information across as quickly and as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And I think part of how we need to going forward is to think about the person in the loop, the person in the system, because ultimately the decisions will be made by a person. We're a long way away from design and engineering where it's a black box where you say design this and press a button. And what matters is that we're actually able to get the information we need as quickly and as efficiently as we can. And at the moment, the best way to do that is using visualization systems and have some sort of cockpit type system within engineering going forward, because the person will always be there.
Great, thank you. One more question, I suppose, to you, Martin, but please do chip in others if you would like to answer this as well. I suppose we can't have a meeting without talking about these, these systemic issues that are facing us currently. So yeah, systemic issues and building resilience in the face of these systemic issues is a very salient topic for many companies right now, I'm sure. What is your advice to these companies that are operating in uncertain times?
One is see the opportunities, because I think there's more than one person at the moment said, don't waste a good crisis, because in all these situations, there are opportunities. It might not be the first thing you thought about, but certainly opportunities will be there. I think the first thing is actually understand the problem, understand the requirement, because where most companies fail is not actually answering the problem statement correctly. And I think a key part of that is actually understand what it is you can offer, where is the opportunity, and actually deliver what's needed rather than what somebody doesn't want. But my first thing would be to say, look at the opportunities at the moment rather than everything as a problem.
Great, thank you. I think that resonates with some of Neil's talk as well. So maybe to adapt the kind of question slightly for you, Neil, maybe a brief mention on, for those that think that design is about making things look pretty, why are we talking about asking the right questions and such future thinking? A brief comment on that, and what is next for design thinking and human-centered design, particularly with this servitization that you're talking about.
Okay, brilliant. So on the question of making things look pretty, I suppose it's actually about making sure that you don't waste effort. That if I constrained the brief to be about design me a kettle, which is a kind of classic way of framing a second diamond brief, if you like, which is about show me the solution, I'm going to get a kettle back. There's all kinds of ways of designing kettles, but if I unpack the problem to understand that actually I want hot water on demand in my kitchen with a moment's notice, then I suddenly open up the potential solution set to include things like boiling water taps. I would never have been able to get to boiling water tap if my brief was simply about design me a kettle. And so coming back to this thing about, isn't design just about making things look pretty? No, it's not. It's fundamentally about digging down into what is the root cause of the challenge that we're trying to meet. It's funny, actually, one of the things that I'm most proud of working on is helping reduce violence and aggression in A&E. It's a project with the NHS, and it's a problem that costs tens of millions of pounds a year. And they've tried so many things over the years, and yet the programme worked with ethnographers to get down to the root cause, which is basically helping explain in simple terms what the triage process was and where people were in that process. That was the reframed brief, and the solution that emerged was a signage system that halved violent and aggressive behaviour in the trust that piloted it. So that's the first aspect. Where next? I just want to see this kind of percolate up more and more into boardrooms as far as possible, because actually I think we can see this design thinking and systems thinking approach can be of such value to the business as a whole and not just the project that we're looking on.
Great, yeah, I absolutely echo that also. I think we've got time for one last question, which is a biggie, and it comes from Rupert. Rupert said, I'll direct this towards Tristan, to like close, sorry Tristan, is to what extent do the speakers look beyond the arenas of value extraction and market and policy megatrends to question the fundamental scalability of their or their clients' activities to deliver prosperity to the projected global population of 12 billion people? Big question, but yeah,
Okay.
I think as a future shaper, what is your take on that?
I think so. I'm gonna say something really glib now. Like, you know, we would say to companies, really echoing what Neil said, you've got a great past ahead of you. We like, one of the things that Room 44 sells into clients is naivety. You know, we're not, although we've done a lot of things, a lot of us, and we've been around for a long time, so with some of those things we get good at. Most of the businesses that we work with at the moment have moved on since we were in them. So we come to those tables with a deliberate objectivity and naivety. And with that angle, you can think very holistically about the system, the context within which your product, your service, your business sits. Now, that's not typically what companies do for themselves. It's a 30,000 foot view of the world, and it allows us to view the effect that what you do has beyond your immediate business and your immediate business requirements. I don't think there's an easy answer to Rupert's question. I'm struggling to get to a point that's going to make some sense to him, but thinking as broadly as possible, reading as much as possible outside what companies do, getting everybody to do to take an interest beyond what that company is there for, will probably at some point be pivotal and seminal and allow them to see a different set of opportunities that can sit within a different system. And I know that sounds a bit loose and woolly, but until you get into the process of deliberate innovation, taking time, investing resource to engaging in the activity routine as part of the routine of the business, it cannot become embedded in the business psyche, and only by doing that can you see how you can deliver value to a different set of people in a different way.
Great, thank you so much, Tristan. Sorry that we have run over. I'll quickly summarize. So yeah, thank you to our speakers, absolutely. And thank you to our panel. Round of applause, sat at home. I'll quickly just summarize some funding opportunities that are available in this space for you. There is the Iscf Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, Manufacturing Made Smarter. There are 4 collaboration building and briefing events that focus on digital technologies to enable supply chains to become more efficient. There's some dates there. To find out more, please go to the KTN website or subscribe to the newsletter, or indeed get in touch and we can tell you a little bit more about that. There is also the Sustainable Innovation Fund, TEMP framework it is called. UK registered businesses can apply for up to a share of £55 million, total available for new projects focusing on sustainable economic recovery from COVID-19. Again, there's a link there, and I think it's been popped in the chat box as well for you. And then lastly, there is also the Sustainable Innovation Fund, SBRI, where organisations can apply for a share of up to £10 million, including that, to help UK business and the public sector recover from COVID-19 in a sustainable manner also. And there's some more information there, and the link again is shared in the chat box. I'd like to thank our speakers very much for their engaging talks and their questions and answers. Thank you guys for attending, and I'd like to thank Abby and Alistair for allowing me to host this. It's been a really enjoyable process. If you've got any questions about the topics that you've heard about today, please do get in touch. And am I right in thinking that you may contact the panelists if you've got any further questions? Are you guys okay with people contacting you?
Yeah, no problem at all for me.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, guys, and take care.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody. I think panelists will be hanging around online just for a quick debrief afterwards if you've got time, if you've not got other meetings. Thanks, delegates, for joining us again today. Thanks, Jake, for hosting.